The ledger for the year 1864 is bound in heavy, scuffed calfskin, its spine reinforced with linen tape that has yellowed to the color of bone. On the inside cover, a stamp from the Department of Public Charities and Correction identifies it as the official property of the Blackwell's Island Lunatic Asylum. The paper is of a high-grade vellum, designed to outlast the individuals whose names are inscribed within its margins. The entry for October 12, 1864 begins at 1:15 p.m. The handwriting is a consistent copperplate script, suggesting a clerk of significant experience and little variation in temperament. On this Tuesday, the atmospheric conditions were noted in the header as overcast, wind northeast. According to the municipal ferry logs, the steamship the Minnehaha made 3 trips from the foot of 26th Street to the island docks. The afternoon manifest shows a cargo of supplies, coal, and 34 females. The intake process for these 34 women was recorded with procedural rigidity. Each woman was assigned a case number ranging from 4102 to 4136. In the ledger, the columns are narrow: name, age, nativity, occupation, and condition of person and clothing. It is in this final column that the record begins to diverge from the standard administrative brevity of the 1860s. For case 4102, identified as Margaret H., age 24, the clerk recorded, condition, filthy. Clothing, 1 wool dress torn. No chemise. 1 boot. For case 4103, Catherine S., age 19. Condition, vermin infested. Clothing, cotton wrap, saturated. The repetition of the word saturated appears in 21 of the 34 entries for that afternoon. The municipal records do not specify the source of the moisture, though the meteorological report for the previous night indicated a rainfall of 1.4 inches. The ledger dictates that upon arrival, all personal effects were to be surrendered to the matron's office. The property inventory for the October 12th intake occupies half a page. The list is notable for its brevity. Case 4105, 1 brass thimble. Case 4112, 1 prayer book. Water damaged. Case 4118, a length of blue ribbon, 3 inches. Case 4120, 2 copper pennies, 1 bent. The remaining 30 women are recorded as possessing naught. Once the inventory was complete, the procedure required the cleaning of the subject. In the 1864 Manual of Asylum Governance, Section F states, every patient shall, upon admission, be thoroughly washed in the communal tub and provided with the uniform of the institution to ensure the eradication of city miasma. However, the Ward 4 supply ledger for the same week contains a specific annotation in the margin: soap stores exhausted, waiting for the barge. Despite the lack of soap, the intake log confirms that the washing of all 34 women was completed by 4 p.m. The record does not describe the temperature of the water or the method of drying. It simply marks ACEC mark in the cleanse column for each case number. Following this, the women were marched to the north wing. Ward 4 was located on the 3rd floor of the stone structure. Its dimensions were 40 feet by 20 feet. According to the floor space allotment records of 80 and 64, the room was designed to hold 18 quiet patients. With the arrival of the October 12th intake, the Ward 4-night census rose to 52. The ledger reflects this density not through a description of the crowding, but through the bedding requisition. The request, signed by the attending physician, Dr. G. Sanger, asks for 20 additional straw pallets for Ward 4. The response from the Board of Commissioners is pasted into the ledger 2 pages later. It is dated October 14, 1864. It reads, "Current stocks of straw are reserved for the stables. Utilize existing mats. Divide by 2 where necessary." In the disposition column of the intake ledger, a small secondary notation was added in pencil next to the names of the 34 new arrivals. It is a single letter, W, in the context of the Blackwell's Island records. W typically denoted working, indicating the patient was physically capable of manual labor. However, a later cross-reference with the sewing room logs shows that only 6 of the women from the October 12th intake were ever assigned a needle or thread. By 6 p.m. on that first day, the clerical record for the intake ends. The final entry for the day is a tally of the total population of the female lunatic asylum, 572. The ink is heavy here, as if the clerk pressed down firmly to finish the task before the archiventinus. This record was briefly withheld for classification. Viewers who wish to follow future releases may subscribe. The file then resumes in the year 1864. The transition from the intake log to the daily ward ledger reveals the first significant omission. While the 34 women are recorded as having arrived and been cleansed, the clothing distribution column for Ward 4 remains blank for the entirety of October 12th and October 13th. In a standard asylum record, this column would list the issuance of a coarse wool dress, a petticoat, and a pair of stockings. Instead, the only entry for Ward 4 on the morning of October 13th is found in the laundry manifest. It notes the receipt of 34 sets of civilian rags, removed from Ward 4, condition, unfit for salvage, burned. This creates a procedural gap. The records show the patient's original clothing was destroyed by order of the sanitary officer. The records also show that no institutional clothing was issued. For 48 hours, the condition of person column for Ward 4 contains no entries at all. The names are there. The case numbers are there, but there is no record of what they wore or how they were covered. As the temperature in the north wing dropped to 48 degrees Fahrenheit, the silence of the ledger during these 48 hours is interrupted only by a single line at the bottom of the page, written by a different hand, smaller, more cramped. It refers to case 4122, a woman named Bridget D. The notareds. Subject 4122 refused to release the wool shawl. Claims it is the only thing she has of the child. Force was required as per protocol. Shawl placed in the incinerator with the rest. Underneath this note, there's a smudge of grease or oil that has blurred the word child. The final unresolved detail of the October 12th intake involves case 4136, the last woman on the list. Her name is recorded as Jane Doe number 6. The ledger notes she was nonverbal and possessed a high fever. Unlike the others, there is no mark in her cleanse column. Instead, there is a small circled X. When the morning roll was called on October 14th, the Ward 4 ledger showed 51 names. Case 4136 is no longer listed in the Ward 4 book. She does not appear in the death ledger. She does not appear in the discharge ledger. Her name, or rather, her designation, simply vanishes between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. The ink for the October 14th roll call is fresh and dark and contains no mention of the vacancy. The operational efficiency of the Blackwell's Island Lunatic Asylum relied upon a strict, circular economy of cloth. According to the 1864 Steward's Handbook, every yard of fabric from the heavy canvas used for straitjackets to the thin cotton of the patient's shifts was to be tracked from acquisition to incineration. In the hierarchy of the institution, the laundry was situated in the damp basement of the north wing, staffed by inmate labor from the nearby workhouse, and overseen by a civilian head. LAUNDRESS. The records for October 1864 indicate that the head laundress was a woman named Mrs. H. Gallo. Her weekly linen audit is preserved in a smaller, cord-bound notebook separate from the main medical ledger. This notebook is characterized by a utilitarian lack of ornament. It is a list of numbers, tallies, and grievances. On October 15th, 3 days after the intake of the 34 women, Mrs. Gallo's log contains the following entry: received 0 units of soap. Delivered to Ward 4 to 0 units of clean linen. Stock on hand, 12 shifts, damaged, 8 petticoats, soiled. Total ward population, 52. Recommendation, none. The procedural reality revealed by this audit is one of stationary filth. The 52 women now residing in Ward 4 were required by asylum rules to change their undergarments twice weekly. However, the linen shortage memos, which began appearing in the Board of Commissioners' files as early as August, reveal that the supply chain had effectively collapsed. The war effort on the mainland had diverted cotton and lye, leaving the island's laundry facilities in a state of suspended animation. The archive contains a letter from the asylum superintendent, Dr. Ralph Parsons, to the board, dated October 17th. The tone is clinical, focusing on the preservation of the building rather than the inhabitants. The lack of fresh linen has resulted in the patients remaining in a state of prolonged dampness following their initial intake washing. The stone walls of Ward 4 are perspiring. The straw pallets, having absorbed the moisture from the subject's skin, are beginning to ferment. Without soap, we are merely moving the grease from the cloth to the water and back to the cloth. Despite this warning, the soap requisition for the week of October 20th was returned with the stamp "Denied." Diverted to Military Hospital, Alexandria. We see the physical consequence of this denial in the apothecary's distribution log. On October 22nd, the pharmacist recorded the issuance of 6 pounds of sulfur ointment and 4 gallons of carbolic acid solution, specifically to Ward 4, in medical records of the era. These substances were the primary tools for combating Sarcoptes scabiei, the itch mite. The procedure for treatment was noted in the Ward 4 daily routine column. The women were to be scrubbed with the acid solution using stiff bristled brushes. Because there was no clean linen to change into after the treatment, the ledger notes that the women were returned to their pallets. The acid, intended to kill the mites, remained on the skin, trapped against the fermenting straw of the beds. An anomaly appears in the record on October 25. The laundress's inventory sudden list 12. 12 sets of linen recovered from the deceased of Ward 2, processed without soap. Transferred to Ward 4. Ward 2 was the infirmary ward for the incurables. The transfer of clothing from a ward of the dying to a ward of the newly admitted was a violation of the 1862 Sanitary Code. However, the transfer voucher is signed by the assistant physician with a small Hurried scrawl in the margin. Necessity overrules the code. We track these 12 sets of linen. According to the Ward 4 distribution log, they were given tow case numbers 4,102 through 4,113, the first 12 women from the October 12th intake. This left 40 women still without institutional dress. In the clothing column for the remainder of the month, the clerk began using a new shorthand, SU, status unknown, or PC, personal covering. The personal covering mentioned in the ledger is a point of archival tension. As established in Chapter 1, the patient's original clothing had been burned upon arrival. The PC mentioned here refers to a different material. Cross-referencing the maintenance log for the north wing, we find a report from the head carpenter. 3 heavy canvas window curtains removed from the Ward 4 day room by parties unknown. Tracks in the dust suggest they were dragged into the sleeping quarters. The ledger does not record any disciplinary action for the theft of the curtains. Instead, the condition of ward report for October 28th simply notes, Ward 4 remains in total darkness. Windows are bare. Patients are seen huddled in the corners using the canvas as collective shrouds. The laundress's inventory for October concludes on the 31st with a final, peculiar entry. Mrs. Galla writes, total items processed this month, 412. Total items lost, 14. Note: the missing items include the linen issued to Ward 4 on the 25th. They have not been returned for washing. When I asked the attendant for the items, I was told they were integrated. The word integrated is not a standard medical or laundry term. It does not appear in any other part of the 1864 ledger. A final detail from the October 31st report. The soap stores remained at 0. However, the water consumption for the laundry room shows a massive spike on the night of the 30th, nearly 400 gallons used between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. There is no record of what was being washed or why the water was drawn at an hour when the laundry staff was officially off duty. The inventory for the month closes. The next page of the ledger is stuck to the one preceding it by a dried, translucent substance that has rendered the ink of the November 1st header unreadable. The nutritional administration of the Blackwell's Island Lunatic Asylum was governed by the scale of dietary allowances, a document revised in early 1864 to reflect the rising costs of the Civil War. According to the Board of Commissioners, the objective was to maintain the minimum caloric threshold for survival without surplus. The records show that the daily cost to feed a patient in Ward 4 was approximately 8 cents. The kitchen ledger for the North Wing details the specific arrival of provisions. The entries for November 1864 indicate a consistent delivery of 3 primary staples: Indian meal, corn, salted beef of grade C quality, and hard bread, hardtack. There is no record of fresh vegetables or fruit entering the North Wing during the entire month of November. Procedural anomaly is found in the ration distribution book. While the kitchen records show the departure of 150 pounds of gruel for Ward 4 each morning, the patient consumption log for the same period remains remarkably clean. In a facility of 52 women, one would expect notations for refusal of food or inability to swallow, particularly among the elderly or the catatonic. Instead, the Ward 4 attendant simply recorded, all fed for 28 consecutive days. The archive suggests a discrepancy between the aggregate and the individual. In the 1864 annual report, the asylum claimed that every patient received 12 ounces of bread daily. However, the bakery waste logs, which tracked the weight of bread that was too moldy or infested for use, show that in the week of November 7th, over 200 pounds of bread were condemned. The procurement files show no replacement order was made. The consequence of this deficit is recorded in the quarterly flesh audit. In the 19th century asylum system, patients were weighed upon intake and again every 3 months to monitor the success of treatment. We cross-reference the intake weights from the October 12th group with the audit performed on November 15th case. 4,102, Margaret H. Intake, 118 pounds, November 15th, 104. LBS, case 4,107, L&M. Intake, 132 pounds, November 15, 112 pounds. Case 4,115. Sarah O. Intake, 110 pounds, November 15th, 91. LBS. The record shows a universal decline. The attending physician, Dr. Sanger, noted in his medical remarks, the subjects appear to be diminishing in physical volume. The skin is becoming translucent, particularly about the ocular orbits. This is attributed to the insane diathesis rather than a lack of sustenance. By labeling the weight loss as a symptom of madness, the asylum's internal logic removed the need for increased rations. The kitchen ledger also contains a specific column for extraordinary supplies intended for patients in the infirmary. For November 1864, the ledger shows the purchase of 3 gallons of fortified port wine and 2 dozen fresh eggs. These items were marked for Ward 4 medical necessity. However, the apothecary's distribution log shows that these items never reached the ward. Instead, a small note in the margin of Vestwood's book indicates that these supplies were utilized for the board's inspection. Luncheon on November 18th. The most haunting detail of the November rations is found in the bones and refuse column. The asylum sold its kitchen scraps back to local rendering plants to offset costs. The weight of the refuse from the north wing began to drop significantly in the middle of November. The refuse manifest for November 22nd contains a complaint from the rendering contractor. The barrels from the north wing contain only grit and water. There are no scraps of meat or gristle. It is as if the plates are being scrubbed by the tongues of the subjects. On the night of November 24th, observed as a day of national Thanksgiving, the special menu recorded in the ledger promised boiled mutton and cranberry. The Ward 4 night log for that date contains a rare, descriptive entry from the attendant. The mutton was largely fat and bone. It was served at 5 p.m. By 6 p.m., the shouting in Ward 4 had ceased. The silence was noted as unusual. A final unresolved detail appears at the end of the November food records. A requisition form was submitted by the Ward 4 night attendant for 1 dozen heavy-duty iron spoons. The reason cited in the request: the previous spoons have been worn down to the handles. The patients are scraping the lime from the mortar in the walls and consuming it when the gruel is thin. The requisition was returned on November 30th. It was marked deferred. Use fingers. The flesh audit for the remaining women was scheduled for the following morning. However, the ledger shows that the scales in the north wing were reported as broken on December 1st. and no further individual waits were recorded for the remainder of the year. The institutional oversight of Blackwell's Island was divided into two distinct bureaucratic realities: the daytime, governed by physicians and clerks, and the nighttime, governed by a skeletal staff of attendants and keepers. In the North Wing, the night shift ran from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The primary record for this period is the Night Watchman's Registry, a narrow, leather-bound volume intended to track incidents, escapes, and calamities. For the month of December 1864, the registry for Ward 4 is signed by an attendant named Thomas C. The entries are notable for their extreme economy of language. For 22 consecutive nights, from December 1st to December 22nd, the entry for each night is identical: 10 p.m., all quiet; 2 a.m., all quiet; 6 a.m., all secure. However, the Infirmary Daybook for the same period contradicts this narrative of stillness. On the morning of December 8th, the Daybook records that case 4110 was brought to the surgeon with a compound fracture of the ulna, cause unknown. On December 12th, case 4115 was recorded as having severe contusions to the facial area and loss of 2 incisors. Neither of these events appears in Thomas C.'s all-quiet logs from the preceding nights. The archive reveals a procedural loophole used by the night staff to avoid the paperwork of incident reports, according to the 1864 Staff Code. Any injury that occurred during a period of restraint required a 2-page deposition. By simply not recording the event, the attendant ensured the record remained clean. The missing hours, specifically the window between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., are characterized by a complete absence of notation. It is during these hours that the night gas lighting logs show a curious pattern. The asylum used a centralized gas system for lighting the hallways. The logs for the North Wing show that while the hallways remained lit, the gas supply to the interior of Ward 4 was manually shut off every night at 11:15 p.m. The darkness of Ward 4 was not merely an environmental condition. It was a recorded policy. A memo from the night supervisor states, "The subjects in Ward 4 are more manageable when they cannot see the perimeter of the room. The darkness serves as a visual restraint." We look to the maintenance vouchers for further clues about what occurred during these dark hours. In mid-December, a voucher was submitted for 4 sets of iron floor rings and 6 feet of heavy chain. The destination listed is Ward 4 corner joists. There is no mention of these chains in the medical ledger, which claimed that mechanical restraints had been phased out in favor of moral treatment. The all-quiet logs continue until the night of December 23rd. On that night, the handwriting of Thomas C. changes. The copperplate script is replaced by a jagged, hurried scrawl. The entry for 3M reads, "The scratching has moved from the walls to the floorboards. I have moved my chair to the hallway." They are silent but for the sound of the nails. This is the first and only time an attendant recorded a subjective experience in the official registry. The daily census for the following morning, December 24th, shows that Thomas C. did not report for his 6 a.m. sign-out. The staff attendant's ledger marks him as resigned effective immediately. No reason is given. He did not collect his final week of wages, which, according to the payroll manifest, remained in the asylum safe for the next 3 years. The most chilling omission in the night log occurs on Christmas Eve. The entry is blank. There is no signature. There is no all quiet. Yet the morning report for December 25th shows that when the day staff arrived, the door to Ward 4 was locked from the outside. As per protocol, a final unresolved detail from the missing hours involves the Ward 4 fireplace. The architectural plans show a single hearth intended to provide heat to the entire room. The coal allocation ledger shows that a full bucket of anthracite was delivered to the ward every evening. However, the chimney sweep's report from January 1865 notes that the Ward 4 flue was entirely clear of soot, suggesting that no fire had been lit in that hearth for the duration of the winter. The records show the coal was delivered. The records show the coal was consumed, but the records also show the chimney was cold. The question of where the heat and the light went during the night of December 24th remains unanswered in the official files. The Night Watchman's Registry resumes on December 26 with a new signature and the return of Thefre's all quiet. While the internal ledgers of Blackwell's Island present a closed loop of administrative data, the external communications log offers a view of the asylum as seen from the mainland. Among the thousands of inquiry sheets archived from 1864, a specific sequence of documents pertains to Case 4107. Ellen M. One of the 34 women from the October intake. The correspondence is initiated by her brother, Thomas M., a stonemason residing in a tenement on Cherry Street. His first letter, dated October 19, 1864, is written on coarse, ruled paper. To the superintendent, I am writing to ask after my sister, Ellen M., who was taken from the rooms on the 11th. I have the money for her keep now. Please tell me the hour for visiting and what she requires in the way of tea or woolens. The outgoing mail registry for the asylum shows no entry for October or November corresponding to Thomas M.'s address. According to the 1864 Visitors Code, friends and relatives may visit on the first Wednesday of each month, provided the patient is deemed presentable by the matron. Thomas M.'s second letter is dated November 4th. The handwriting is noticeably tighter, the ink darker. I stood at the 26th Street dock as told. The ferryman said there was no record of my name on the manifest. He said Ward 4 is closed to the public. I have not heard from Ellen. I sent a parcel of stockings and a tin of biscuits. Please confirm they reached her hand. We cross-reference this with the Ward 4 property log for November. As established in Chapter 2, Ward 4 was experiencing a critical linen shortage. The property log for November 5th contains a single entry, one parcel received. Contained 4 pairs wool stockings, 1 tin biscuits. Seized as contraband. Stockings transferred to general store biscuits. Destroyed due to sanitary risk. There is no record that Ellen M. was ever informed of the gift or the inquiry. The archive of the unsaid is most prominent in the third letter. Dated December 10, 1864. This document was found not in the official correspondence file, but tucked into the back of the Ward 4 intake ledger used as a bookmark. I have spoken to a woman who was discharged from Ward 2. She tells me the north wing is a place of shadows. She says she heard my sister's name called during the night, but no one answered. I'm coming to the island by my own boat if I must. I demand to see the ledger. The response to this letter was not a reply, but a legal notice of trespass issued by the City of New York. Dated December 15th, the notice, filed in the Municipal Archives, warns Thomas M. that any unauthorized approach to Blackwell's Island will result in his own incarceration at the workhouse. The procedural trail of Thomas M. ends with a final, formal document, a petition for habeas corpus filed in the New York Supreme Court on December 28, 1864. In the petition, he describes his sister as a woman of quiet mind, merely exhausted by the fever. The court's ruling, dated January 4, 1865, is preserved in the judicial records. It states, "The court finds no cause for interference." The records of the Blackwell's Island Asylum are the final authority on the status of its inmates. The superintendent reports that L&M is undergoing necessary stabilization and is unfit for produce. The word produce here is a legal term meaning to be brought before the court. However, in the margin of the court's copy of the ruling, there is a small, handwritten note from the asylum's legal representative. Subject 4107 is not currently in a state to be moved. The linen is not yet dry. The haunting reality of this correspondence is found in the daily ward ledger for L&M during the period. Her brother was writing, "On the days Thomas M. was at the docks, the ledger for case 4107 remains blank except for the daily all quiet or working marks. However, on December 10th of the day, Thomas M. wrote of his sister's name being called in the night. The ledger contains a rare clinical observation. Subject 4107 has ceased to respond to her name. She appears to be listening to something behind the plaster. She has removed the threads from her own hem and is attempting to sew her fingers together." The correspondence log concludes for the year 1864. The final entry in the visitor's book for the North Wing is a summary tally. Total inquiries 1,402, total visits granted 12, total Ward 4 visits 0. The file for Thomas M. remains in the unresolved cabinet. There is no record of him ever receiving a death certificate for his sister, nor a discharge notice. The letters continue into 1865, but the ink on the envelopes is never broken. They remain in the archive, sealed. Their contents unknown to the woman in Ward 4 who, according to the ledger, had forgotten the sound of a human voice. The unresolved detail lies in the postage fund. The asylum charged patients for the paper and ink used to write home. The Ward 4 fund shows that L&M was charged for 3 sheets of paper in November. No letters from L&M exist in the archive, nor were any ever delivered to Cherry Street. The paper was used. The ink was consumed. The record of where those words went is missing. The meteorological history of New York City records the winter of 1864 to 1865 as one of sustained atmospheric severity. According to the New York Tribune's weather columns, a polar wave descended upon the East River on December 14, 1864, on Blackwell's Island, where the stone structures were exposed to the wind from all 4 points of the compass. The internal temperature of the North Wing became a matter of administrative record. The boiler room log for the North Wing is the primary document for this period. It tracks the consumption of anthracite coal and the steam pressure maintained in the pipes. On December 14th at 4 a.m., the engineer recorded, "Main valve cracked. Pressure 0. North Wing cold." The procedure for a heating failure required the immediate evacuation of patients to the central heated rotunda. However, the superintendent's order book contains a conflicting entry dated December 15. Rotunda occupancy at maximum. Ward 4 to remain in situ. Issued double blankets where possible. The blanket requisition for Ward 4 is preserved in the auditor's files. It was submitted at 9 a.m. on December 15th by the matron. It requests 52 wool blankets. The response, stamped by the supply office, reads, "Stock exhausted. Order placed with Mainland Textile Mill. Expected delivery, January 20th. The 18 record refers to the temperature recorded by the night watchman in the Ward 4 hallway on the night of December 16 at 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The biological reality of the ward changed. The daily ward ledger for the period between December 16th and December 23rd ceases to record behavioral observations and shifts entirely to physical manifestations. Case 4105. Subject noted as blue about the extremities. Refuses to move from the floor ring. Case 4118. Subject found with hair frozen to the stone wall due to condensation. Hair removed with shears. Case 4125. Subject unresponsive. Breathing shallow. No warmth in the skin. The archive reveals a specific cold weather protocol used by the staff to manage the mortality rate. Rather than providing heat, the medical journal shows an increase in the administration of stimulants. On December 18th, the apothecary issued 4 gallons of medicinal brandy to Ward 4. The distribution log shows that this was not administered by the spoonful to the patients, but was added to the evening gruel. Alcohol, a vasodilator, creates a temporary sensation of warmth while actually accelerating the drop in core body temperature. The ledger tracks the result. Between December 18th and December 21st, the night log records high levels of activity and vocalization until approximately midnight, followed by total lethargy until dawn. The most precise record of the cold is found in the plumbing repairs ledger. On December 22nd, the facility's plumber was called to Ward 4 to investigate a blockage in the drainage grate. His report is clinical. The grate was found to be obstructed by a mass of frozen organic matter, consisting of unwashed linen and human waste. The mass had bonded to the ironwork, required a chisel and boiling water to clear. This detail corroborates the laundress's inventory from Chapter 2, The Women, lacking clean clothes or blankets, had attempted to use their remaining linen and eventually the canvas curtains to plug the gaps in the windows and the drains to stop the draft. On December 23rd, the 18 record ends not because the temperature rose, but because the thermometer in the North Wing hallway was reported as shattered. The death ledger for this week contains a series of entries that the archive identifies as the respiratory cluster. December 21st, Case 4112, Mary K. Congestion of the lungs. December 22nd, Case 4129, unknown. Cause, exposure. December 23rd, Case 4104, Sarah J. Cause, catarrh. The word exposure in Case 4129 is particularly significant. It is the only time in the 1864 ledger that the administration admitted the environment was the primary cause of death. This entry was later struck through with a single horizontal line and replaced with pneumonia in a different ink. The unresolved detail of the 18 record lies in the coal manifest, despite the boiler being recorded as cold and the valves cracked. The records show that 5 tons of coal were delivered to the North Wing between December 14th and December 25. If the coal was not being burned in the boiler, and as established in Chapter 4, it was not being burned in the Ward 4 hearth, its destination remains undocumented. A final note in the maintenance log dated December 26th reads, "Small fire discovered in the Ward 4 day room. Source: a pile of Thea-integrated linen from Chapter 2. The subjects were found sitting in a circle around the smoke. No heat was produced, but the smell of the burning cloth was noted as offensive to the staff on the floor below. The log does not record how the women obtained a flame. The subterranean level of the north wing served as the final repository for the asylum's material waste. By January 1865, the laundry operations report indicates that the basement had ceased to function as a cleaning facility and had instead become a storage site for contaminated goods. The records describe a singular mass of fabric, referred to in the sanitary inspector's notes as the accumulation. The waste log for the first week of January 1865 provides a weight-based tracking of this mass. On January 4th, the total weight of unwashed linen from Ward 4 was recorded at 410 pounds. By January 11th, the weight had increased to 580 pounds. This increase is mathematically significant, given that no new clothing had been issued to the ward since October. The added weight can only be attributed to the absorption of moisture, biological fluids, and environmental particulates. The procedure for managing the accumulation was dictated by the 1864 Plague Prevention Act, which required that any linen associated with the itch or the flux be boiled for no less than 4 hours. However, the fuel vouchers for the basement boilers show a deficit. The coal intended for the laundry had been diverted to the officers' quarters in the south wing. The archive contains a work order dated January 14, 1865, addressed to the head laundress, Mrs. Gallo. It instructs her to manually sort the Ward 4 pile to identify items still possessing structural integrity for reuse. Mrs. Gallo's written refusal is preserved in the personnel file. Her response is written in a shaking hand. "I will not send my girls into the pile. It is no longer just cloth. It is a living thing. The heat coming off it is not from the steam, is the rot." When we moved the top layer, the movement of the lice sounded like falling sand. Following this refusal, the Ward 4 Daily Ledger notes a change in the sanitary treatment of the patients. Since the clothing could not be washed, the administration attempted to sanitize the subject while they remained in the garments. The apothecary's log records the delivery of 20 gallons of chlorinated lime solution to the north wing. The treatment protocol involved the use of a hand-pumped sprayer. The record states, patients in Ward 4 were gathered in the center of the room and doused with the lime solution to arrest the spread of the odor and the vermin. The chemical reaction between the chlorinated lime and the organic matter in the unwashed linen produced a localized bleaching effect. We find the evidence of this in the coroner's report for case 4118, the woman whose hair had previously been frozen to the wall. She died on January 18th. The report notes, the subject's skin was found to be chemically sloughed in areas where the clothing was most saturated with the lime. The fabric had effectively fused with the epidermal layer. The unwashed linen pile also served as a hiding place for things omitted from the official inventory of Possessions. In February 1865, a deep cleaning was finally forced by a visit from the grand jury. The search and seizure list from the basement reveals what had been integrated into the cloth. 7 rusted iron spoons, missing since November, a collection of human teeth, found wrapped in a rag from case 4122, a mummified object, which the clerk refused to name, noting only that it was wrapped in the remains of the blue ribbon from the October 12th intake. The final unresolved detail of the basement records involves the water consumption spike mentioned in Chapter 2, while the 400-gallon spike on October 30th remained a mystery. A second spike of 600 gallons was recorded on the night of January 20th. The maintenance log for that night shows that the drainage grates in the basement were open to their maximum capacity. The record does not show any laundry being done. It shows only that the unwashed linen pile was gone by morning. The waste manifest for January 21st does not list the linen as burned. It does not list it as buried. It simply contains a single word in the disposition column, river. According to the East River tidal charts of 1865, the current on the night of January 20th was moving south toward the harbor at 4 knots. The records show that 580 pounds of integrated material were released into the water among that mass. According to the missing property audit, were the last remaining identifiers of the 34 women, the tags, the hems, and the stitches that bore their case numbers. Without the linen, the women of Ward 4 were, for the first time in the ledger, truly nameless. The official record of Ward 4 is a narrative of ink and authority. However, a forensic examination of the Ward 4 ledger reveals a secondary, unsanctioned layer of data. Throughout the winter of 1864 and into the spring of 1865, the margins of the book were utilized as a workspace for a hand that does not match the clerk's copperplate. These notations are written in light graphite pencil, often faint, and placed in the white space around the official death. And discharge tallies. The archive identifies these marks as sub-clerical annotations. They do not follow the rules of municipal record keeping. While the official columns track names and case numbers, the margins track the echoes. One recurring margin note, found next to the dates of heavy snowfall, is a series of tally marks, vertical lines grouped in 5s. Between January and March 1865, these tallies appear 42 times. They do not correlate with the number of meals served, the number of deaths recorded, or the number of staff on duty. They appear only after the night watchman's signature. A specific annotation appears on February 12th, next to the name of Case 4118, whose death was recorded in January. The pencil note reads, "The bed is still warm." Thematron says it is the steam pipes, but the pipes have been dead since December. Someone is lying in the empty numbers. The procedural distance of the institution began to fail in the margins. We find evidence of oral hallucinations, recorded not by the patients but by the staff. A note in the margin of the medication distribution page on February 19 states, "The screaming has stopped, which is worse." Now there is only the sound of the scratching from Chapter 4. It is rhythmic, like a heartbeat, but coming from the stone. The most significant marginal discovery involves the names missing from the ledger. In the official discharge column, only 3 women from the October 12th intake are listed as having left the island. However, The pencil notes in the margin of the March 1865 summary list 12 names with the prefix gone. Gone. Case 4102. Gone. Case 4109. Gone. Case 4122. The official record for these women shows no discharge, no transfer, and no death. They simply cease to have entries in the daily observations. When the grand jury investigators arrived in April 1865, they noted a discrepancy in the census. The ledger showed 52 inhabitants, but the physical count was only 38. The clerk's official explanation, written in a formal memo, was clerical error. Subjects were likely transferred to the workhouse and not recorded. Yet, the workhouse intake logs for 1865 contain no mention of these women. The ledger's margin also contains evidence of a shadow inventory, while the laundress's inventory, Chapter 2, claimed a total lack of supplies. The pencil notes suggest that certain items were being held in Ward 4 by the patients themselves, hidden in the integrated linen or within the cracks of the masonry. March 4th, found case 4130 with a sharpened piece of the Ward 4 grate. She was not using it for violence. She was carving the names of the gone into the underside of the floorboards. She says the wood must remember what the paper forgets. The final unresolved detail of the margins is a drawing. On the very last page of the 1864 to 1865 ledger, tucked into the gutter of the binding, is a pencil sketch of a face. It is not a portrait, but a schematic. The eyes are oversized, and the mouth is replaced by a series of horizontal lines resembling the stitching of a garment or the bars of a cage. Underneath the drawing, a single sentence is written: "The ledger is full, but the room is empty." This note was written on April 14, 1865. The same night the news of President Lincoln's assassination reached the island. In the chaos of the national tragedy, the Ward 4 ledger was closed and moved to the dead files room. The 38 remaining women were moved to a different wing, and the north wing was locked for sanitary renovation. The records show the door was barred. The records show the ledger was archived, but the sub-clerical annotations suggest that the accounting was not finished. The final tally in the margin does not end in a number, but in a question: who is the 39th? As established in Chapter 1, only 34 women were in the original intake. With the existing 18, the total should have been 52. The math of the margin never quite reconciles with the math of the ink. The clinical resolution of Ward 4 is found in the interment logs of the City of New York when a patient died on Blackwell's Island without a claimant or the funds for a private burial. The procedure was absolute. The body was transferred to the dead boat for transport to Hart Island. The municipal potter's field dot in the spring of 1865. The consignment manifests show a significant increase in bulk transfers from the North Wing. The records do not treat these as individual deaths, but as a logistics problem. On April 20, 1864, the manifest lists 6 crates female, unspecified. The procedural distance is maintained through the use of the numbering system. Upon arrival at the burial ground, the names recorded in the Ward 4 ledger were discarded. According to the Manual of the City Cemetery, Section 8, to ensure the efficient utilization of the trench, subjects shall be identified by the date of arrival and a sequential digit etched onto a wooden marker. The names are to be kept in a separate, secure book. We cross-reference the Ward 4 death ledger with the Hart Island trench maps. Case 4112, Mary K., recorded as deceased December 21st, Hart Island. Record, no, 804. Trench 3, case 4104, Sarah J. Recorded as deceased December 23rd, Hart Island. Record, no, 811. Trench 3. However, an investigation of Trench 3 reveals a physical impossibility. The trench dimensions log states that Trench 3 was 30 feet long and 6 feet deep, designed to hold 150 coffins in 3 layers. The summary of occupancy for April 1865 shows that 212 subjects were placed in Trench 3. The archive suggests that to accommodate the respiratory cluster from Chapter 6, the procedure of individual coffining was suspended. The laborer's timesheet for the burial crew contains a notation from April 22nd, soil is too wet for the heavy boxes, utilizing the linen wrap method for the north wing consignment to save space. The linen wrap refers to the practice of wrapping the deceased in their institutional bedding. As established in Chapter 7, the linen from Ward 4 was integrated with filth and chemicals. By burying the subjects in this fabric, the asylum effectively ensured that the biological markers of their condition were sealed into the earth, a haunting discrepancy appears in the reconciliation of the dead when the municipal auditors compared the asylum death certificates with the burial vouchers in May 1865. They found 14 vouchers that did not have a corresponding certificate. These vouchers were for female. Ward 4, the burial master's log, contains a curious clinical note regarding these 14. The subjects arrived without tags. They were dressed in what appeared to be heavy canvas window curtains. They were placed in the lower tier of Trench 4, no digits assigned. These 14 women represent the gone from the ledger's margin in Chapter 8. They were not discharged. They were simply moved from the living ledger to the burial manifest without the intermediary step of a medical declaration. The final unresolved detail of the Potter's Field consignment involves Case 4136, Jane Doe No. 6, the woman who vanished in Chapter 1. In the very back of the 1865 burial book, there is a late entry dated May 10th. It reads, "Discovered one small skeletal remain during the excavation of the north wing cellar, wrapped in a blue ribbon. Interred as miscellaneous? The geomatter in the perimeter of Trench 3. The miscellaneous designation allowed the record to be closed without an investigation into how a patient from an intake of 34 could be reduced to skeletal remains. In less than 7 months, the Potter's Field consignment for Ward 4 ends with a total of 41 interments. As the original intake was 34 and 18 were already present, there should have been 11 survivors left, yet the surviving census for May 1865 lists only 4. The records show 41 buried. The records show 4 living. Total 45. The intake showed 52. The math of the dead leaves 7 women unaccounted for. They are not in the earth of Hart Island, and they are not in the wards of Blackwell's, the final entry in the Blackwell's Island Administrative Journal regarding the North Wing is dated June 12, 1865. It is a formal order of decommission following the grand jury's report on the sanitary failures of the previous winter. The Board of Commissioners mandated that Ward 4 be gutted to the stone to eliminate the persistent odor of the integrated linen and the chemical lime. The procedure for the closure was recorded by the head of maintenance. The process began with the inventory of fixtures. The list is brief: 18 iron bedsteads, 6 broken, 4 wooden benches, and 1 heavy-duty iron floor grate. A procedural anomaly occurred during the removal of the floorboards. The workman's log for June 15th contains a report of a structural discovery behind the plaster of the eastern wall, which shared a chimney flue with the main boiler. The workers found a void space. According to the architectural plans of 1848, this space did not exist. Inside the void, the maintenance crew found the missing hours from Chapter 4. They recovered 3 dozen daily rations of hard bread, untouched and petrified, a collection of sanitary shifts that had been meticulously pleated and folded, despite being unwashed, a series of names scratched into the interior stone with such depth that the workers' chisels could not erase them. The record of this discovery was not included in the final audit sent to the mayor's office. Instead, a confidential memo was filed within the personnel department. It noted that the workmen refused to continue the demolition without an increase in wages for disturbance of spirit. The request was granted, a rare instance of the asylum paying for an intangible cause. The final disposition of subjects for Ward 4 was completed by June 20. The 4 surviving women from the October intake cases: 4,103, 4,111, 4,128, and 4,131 were transferred to the chronic division. Upon transfer, their histories were condensed. The 1864 Ward 4 ledger was not sent with them. Instead, their new records began with the notation: origin unknown. Admitted to chronic division June 1806, 5. Nonverbal condition, stationary. By detaching the women from the 1864 ledger, the asylum effectively erased the respiratory cluster, the 18 record, and the unwashed linen pile. To the state, these women had no past. They were merely new entries in a fresh book. The ledger of dead names was placed in a cedar chest in the basement of the City Hall archives. On the final page, after the clerk's signature and the all-secure stamp, there is a small clinical tally of the Ward 4 renovation costs. Lime and plaster, $14.00 new flooring, $22.50 incineration of debris, $5.00 total, $41.50 the cost to reset the room, was less than the cost of the bread that had been withheld from the women during the winter of 1864. The file concludes with a post-mortem audit conducted in 1869. The auditor noted a persistent discrepancy in the North Wing census that could never be reconciled. The 7 women unaccounted for in Chapter 9 remained open cases until 1872, when the Board of Commissioners issued a blanket resolution. The resolution stated, all names remaining on the 1864 rolls without a corresponding body or discharge paper are hereby declared legally extinct. The legally extinct status is the ultimate archival silence. It is not a death, and it is not a life. It is the procedural admission that the record has failed. The Ward 4 ledger remains in the archive. If one turns to the October 12th intake and holds the vellum to a light, the indentations of the pencil marks from Chapter 8 are still visible beneath the ink of the 1872 extinct stamp. The names are there, the case numbers are there, and the unresolved detail remains, the 7 names that the ledger records as having garived but never having left. Despite the room now being empty, the file is now closed.